mystical thing. We shouldn't rejoice in these sort of things. But here we are in 2024 dealing with all the anti-Semitism and hatred and demonization that we are, this explosion of anti-Semitism since October the 7th. And we're going to have a lecture by an eminent scholar, Dan Michman, speaking about Holocaust and Holocaust education and research. And last night, 2 people were assassinated. Death and violence is horrible, but they represent a vibrant, well-organized, well-funded social movement that has taken the anti-Semitism of Europe that led to the Holocaust. They've taken the same words, the same ideas, the same ideology, and they're trying to implement the same goal for 2024. And if that were not bad enough, in the academy, the intellectuals from the radical, they claim to be on the left, I don't know, the radical, whatever they are, have this alliance with the social movement. And it's permeated our universities, it's permeated the media of record, and here we are. As they say in Yiddish, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Anyways, so here we are, and things will be unfolding as we speak. So it's really a privilege. Dan and his wife come every year, and many kippas have been made in our sessions, I think.
And we like it.
I know. So it's great that you're both here. So Dan, as many of you know, is a professor of modern Jewish history and was the former chair of the Arnold and Leona Finkel Institute of Holocaust Research at Bar Ilan University in Israel. He was also head of the International Institute for Holocaust Research and the incumbent of the John Nejman Chair of Holocaust Studies in Yad Vashem. He's published widely in many languages. He's really, an eminent leading scholar on aspects of the Holocaust. His specific area of expertise was looking at the Dutch Jewish history during the Holocaust, as well as other issues in the way Holocaust education and history is being portrayed in the academy. So Dan's lecture today is developments in Holocaust research since 1990 and the consequent changes of our understanding of the Holocaust, a very important subject matter. And I'll just say I was with David Patterson at a Holocaust research conference, and it was incredible to see leading postmodern scholars taking anti-Semitism out of the equation and history of Holocaust studies. Extraordinary. As they try to, departicularize Holocaust studies to gender studies, taking anti-Semitism out of the study. It's extraordinary. So your work is very important. So thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you. You touched already upon one of the issues. So the interesting aspect of what I'm doing is that the expansion of Holocaust studies is enormous. When I entered the field in the mid-1970s, I never thought that it would be so broad. But it raises also problems, and I'll try to do my best to concise it into the time allotted to this lecture. But I would like to start with a question: who is here teaching Holocaust studies, or Shai? Who else? Hedy? Well. And who followed a course on the Holocaust? A little bit more, but not too many. So happily we have some ignorant people. And those who studied or teach, what textbook do you use for teaching the Holocaust? Could you?
We studied the memoirs of the Holocaust.
Memoirs.
And also.
So via literature, or what is it? Yeah.
The
Starting with Elie Wiesel.
Elie Wiesel, Primo Levi.
Okay. The canon.
Anthony
Polonsky. What?
Polonsky.
Polonsky.
Anthony.
Yeah. Anthony, that's the British
Yes.
perspective of Poland. And
Yes,
so,
correct.
yeah.
It can be a need to know about the part of our history, recent history.
I did.
Recent history.
Yeah. No, but I'm asking now about the book that you have used for things. Anybody has read Hilberg, Karl Hilberg? Yeah, so so I just have to know where to start, because of course there are several questions here, conceptual questions that we. So I'll ask another question. If anybody of you wants to propose a definition of the Holocaust. How would you, if somebody asks you about the Holocaust, what is it? To somebody who is more ignorant than you are, and you will explain it. You'll try to explain, to give a short description, definition. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I talk about the Holocaust, I say that it is part of the history of anti-Semitism, and it is a culmination of the answer to the Jewish question that was posed in the 19th century, and it's the attempted annihilation of the Jewish people. That's how
I'll take the last part, because the other one is the causes. You talked about the causes, but the event itself was the attempt to annihilate the Jewish people.
Sure.
Right? Okay.
I
Another,
would say the Jewish nation myself.
or the Jewish nation.
Yes.
Okay. Who else? Another. Yeah. My wife is laughing, so. It's a grandson when he was 6 years old, but she keeps it.
Sweet.
He is now 17. But
He's 17? I hope he still loves to say.
Yeah, okay.
I've had to sort of go to like a textbook definition of the Holocaust because I noticed that people take the Holocaust, the term Holocaust, and apply it to other horrific events, which sort of seems as Holocaust is it's not an event, but like a describing an adjective or something like that.
A little bit louder, but how would you say, in one sentence, what is the Holocaust?
I think I think I like what you had just mentioned, the sort of attempted eradication of.
That's what she said, the attempt of the eradication of the Jewish people as a nation and, oh, yeah?
Let's say the state-sanctioned policy by Nazi Germany and its allies to annihilate Jewish people in Europe from the years of the Third Reich, from 19
Okay, okay. And
I work in more comparative studies, so going back to your first question, I think a lot about like Michael Rothberg's multidirectional memory and questions of the Holocaust as exemplary and how other, like you were saying, how other marginalized groups utilize the Holocaust memory for their own aims.
but that's already memory.
Yeah,
I'm asking now about the event itself. How would we define it,
I
right?
would push back on that a bit because I think that it is collective memory that solidifies our definition of the Holocaust itself.
There is memory, but there's also scholarship. What scholarship finds, right? It's not only memory, but okay, it's also a dimension of the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, when I was thinking about it, I was in China, I would adopt the definition from ISGAP. So it's, I would emphasize it's a systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by Nazi regime and its collaborators. So I will emphasize on that definition and compare it with Obama and Shoah.
Okay, so we have heard, yeah, another one.
I think it also should be mentioned that it includes the annihilation, of course, of the Jewish people, the culture, the language, and the religion.
Okay, so we heard, oh, another one.
Just one thing, I would say by any means possible. All of these by any means possible, because there was
Okay.
Einsatzgruppen, there were neighbors killing neighbors, and so it was
Okay.
By any means possible.
Okay, so we heard several attempts. Another one.
Perhaps this goes to another domain, that means unprecedented or uniqueness of the Holocaust, but sometimes I tend to make a distinction from other genocides, that it was across multiple nations, orchestrated across the European territory. So it was not like other genocide, which usually take place in within one state entity or within one country by one regime, but this was an orchestrated effort of Nazi Germany, as it was said, and its allies to perform a genocide of Jews across multiple nations, multiple countries at the same time.
Okay. So that was already a lecture, right? Yeah. Another one, Hedy.
Just really quick, I wanted to say in relation to what you were just saying, I see the word Holocaust capitalized, I see it not capitalized. It's something inside of me, especially as a child of a survivor, I get upset when it's not capitalized. So I feel like, what is the distinctive nature around the Holocaust of the Jewish people? Because we know during the Holocaust there were other peoples who were persecuted, but that the attempted genocide of the Jewish people makes it a capital H of the Holocaust. So just something
Okay.
to think about, and people call it a rupture of civilization. Was there something so distinctive about it?
Okay, so we heard several proposals, right? They are not identical. So that's one of the issues, right? That we use a term, but people understand it in different ways. Not exactly. So we can say that in most of these definitions that were proposed here, the central element is genocide, right? Genocide of the Jews, but there was also this addition of the persecution and annihilation, right? Because persecution, if we now go into the historical details, in the 1930s, after the ascendance of the Nazis to power in 1933, there was persecution of in various modes, but there was not yet a murder of the Jews, and even immigration was encouraged, right? So, and then the question is, if the 1930s are part of the Holocaust, yes or no, right? And just to give you already a taste of the problems or the things that we encounter in scholarship, some of you may know the major comprehensive history of the Holocaust by Saul Friedlander, Nazi Germany and the Jews. It has 2 volumes, one 1933 through 1939, the other one 1939 through 1945. The first one is called The Persecution, and the second one is Annihilation or Extermination of the Jews. So he makes a certain difference. There are 2 volumes, they are part of one project, but there is already something in it that you can sense that how to have these 2 parts together, and on the other hand, with this idea in mind that the Holocaust is the genocide of the Jews, right? And so that is one of the issues that we try to understand, and I'll try to understand, and in the end also propose perhaps a redefinition of the Holocaust. Because for many people, when you say the Holocaust, it's identical to the genocide of the Jews, right? So before I start with the survey and so on, I'll tell a little bit more about myself than the official academic presentation that Charles or how he introduced me. Yes, what do you?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Some people say.
Can you be a little bit louder?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, some people say during the war, instead of saying Holocaust,
thank you very much, because that's what I want to start with. Exactly. So you were the appetizer for for what I started. Exactly. I'll first deal with the terminology, because that's important. But before that, some words about myself also. So, as Charles said, I taught. I'm now retired, but I taught for 39 years Holocaust studies at Bar Ilan University, and I'm head of the Yad Vashem Research Institute. But the question is, how did I get there? And we have, with my wife, two interpretations. One is that she says that it was predetermined, because my parents were Holocaust survivors from the Netherlands. And we came to Israel when my father was appointed as Director General of Yad Vashem. So I was 10 years old. So nowadays I'm the only person at Yad Vashem who is still there since 1957. There's no other person who can tell about the early days of this institution. For myself, I think the explanation is much more complicated, because I was interested in biblical history. And I started with excavations and learning ancient languages like Ugaritic and Aramaic and so on. And and even before that, the linguistic aspects. And I found it very interesting. And gradually, I moved to modern Jewish history, first at the end of the 18th century, 19th century, and so on. And I ended up in Holocaust studies in 1976, when at Bar Ilan University they were looking for a replacement for the former professor of Holocaust studies, who was a survivor himself from Vilna, Mark Dvorzhetsky, and he was the person who established the first Holocaust chair in the world at Bar Ilan University in 1959. He died in 1974, and they were looking for somebody who would replace him. And I came from I dealt with, in my PhD thesis with German Jewish refugees after the ascendance of the Nazis to power in Germany to the Netherlands. And I got the job. So since then, I'm there. But my background, not so much of the biblical aspect, but of linguistics, stayed with me. And I think it's very important for historians to be aware of linguistic aspects, especially semantics and how language is used. So, where is it? My PowerPoint presentation is not very long, and because I'm not dealing with geography and cartoons, it's only the main points of my presentation. There will be more, but I'll start with it that since I entered this field in 1976. At Bar Ilan University, and afterwards also at the Open University of Israel, the expansion of Holocaust research has been enormous. I couldn't foresee that when I entered the period, the field, and I recently wrote an overview of the state of research. Because it's almost impossible now to catch the whole picture of what is going on in this field of research. So I asked the Yad Vashem library to provide me with some data about what they received, and one of the results was that scholarly studies of the Holocaust between 2009 and 2021 the number of books, scholarly books, volumes. Any guess? It's up there? Yeah? Okay. I'm looking if you're really reading what I present here. So, so in 11 years, some 10,000 books, and that's not articles in periodicals, right? And this is in original research in 28 languages. Right? So this is an enormous field nowadays, and therefore I think it's important to give a certain overview. I'm sure that other scholars who are very much involved in the field will present things in a different way. That's normal. But I think for our seminar here, it's important to place the Holocaust in the current discourse. It was mentioned here that Edward Said said that the Palestinians are the Jews of today during the Holocaust, right? And also there is this issue is whether Israel was established because of the Holocaust, as a result of the Holocaust. I've written about it. If you have time and you cannot fall asleep at night, you can enter. You find it on the internet, some of these studies. So as I say, it is relevant to various aspects of what we are dealing here today, but the field itself is a scholarly field that has very much developed and is now dealing also not only with the core period itself, but also of the immediate results and memory and commemoration and representation and so on. So these are other aspects. I will limit myself to the findings based on research of the core period itself. So before that, I want to start with the terminology. Should I take one with me or?
Would it the clicker?
What? No, not a clicker. Or I'll stay here.
The microphone. That could be the point.
Okay, from here. Yeah. So the terminology. I can give a long lecture on that too, but nowadays the terms that we are acquainted with and that we use are Holocaust and Shoah. Right? I'm sure that you know these terms. Now, Shoah is a Hebrew word, a biblical word, which actually is the meaning of it is catastrophe, disaster, unexpected disaster that comes from afar suddenly, but the term is used throughout the centuries for various catastrophes, and one of the last cases where I found the term used in the Hebrew discourse in Palestine, in the Yishuv, the Jewish community in the Yishuv, is in 1932, where there is in a daily newspaper, they have a title about the Shoah of the water supply to Jerusalem. Right? So the catastrophe of water supply to Jerusalem. But from the moment that of the Nazi ascendance to power in 1933, the term is used for the persecution, also for some other things, but mainly for the persecution of the Jews, first in Germany and then in other countries and so on. And what happens with the term is that more and more information about the persecution pours in, and the load of the word, we're speaking about semantics, the load of the word changes. And then in 1945, people say, you shouldn't use this word for other catastrophes. We'll keep it, sanctify it for what happened recently. Right? Now, this is in the Hebrew discourse in the Yishuv, in the Jewish community in Eretz Yisrael in Palestine. The other term, Holocaust, is a Greek word for sacrifices, burnt sacrifices for the gods, which was used in the Greek translation of the Bible for korban olah, an entirely burnt sacrifice. And the term is used afterwards in various languages for all kinds of catastrophes. And there is an important article by John Petrie, you can find it online, who studied and looked for the usage of this term in English since the 16th century. And you'll find it for forest fires and for shipwreck sinking here and there, and during World War II and World War I and so on. But as from around 1960, it becomes the leading term for what we're talking about, and I'll say something about it afterwards. For those of you who are interested, and I talked about it with some people here the other day, is there is this search engine of Google, Ngram, you know it? Ngram. And there if you can find how words are used in books that were scanned by Google Books since the year 1800. So if you enter it and you put the term Holocaust, you can find it in English, in German, in French, and so on. You'll see that it suddenly peaks in 1960, right? Yes, Naya?
A quick question. When I was also researching the terminology, I just wanted to make sure I was correct. I found the first time the term Holocaust was used was as a barbecue in a New York Times article.
I really don't know if from when, for what year.
Definitely before the Holocaust.
Yeah, but what John Petrie shows, it is already from the 16th century. You can find it all over, right? So there are several articles that try to find the first time that it is used, but it's people who are limited. They start to look at 1938 or 1939, but the term is used throughout. It is not coined for the purpose of this. And the same is with Shoah, right? So the question, historical question is, of course, what happened around 1960? And around 1960 is, of course, the capture of Adolf Eichmann and the trial. There's also another aspect, and that is what happened in German research on Nazism, which culminated during the 1950s towards the understanding that anti-Semitism was not just another atrocity or another part of Nazi ideology, but it was central to it. You have to understand social policies and foreign policy and so on through the angle of anti-Semitism, right? So this was another aspect. And the third one is, interestingly, and you mentioned Elie Wiesel. The English version of Elie Wiesel's book Night was published in 1960. And in this book, there is already in the original French version from 1958, there's an introduction by the French Catholic intellectual François Mauriac. François Mauriac also wrote an introduction to an earlier book by Léon Poliakov, which was a comprehensive history, one of the first comprehensive histories of the Holocaust from 1951. And in this introduction, he uses the term Holocaust, with a lower case H, but he uses it. So journalists and others around 1960 during the Eichmann trial were looking for a term to use it, and they apparently caught up this term by François Mauriac. And then suddenly you see an explosion of the term used for what we are talking about. Although there are several stages afterwards. Of course, in 1978, there is the American TV series Holocaust, based on the script by Gerald Green, which had an enormous impact. And then the term expands, and you see that it starts to be used for Homo Holocaust, for instance, Animal Holocaust, and so on. So the term is used again also for other cases. Now, the interesting thing is that these are not the terms of the survivors. Survivors used other terms, right? Survivors, in Yiddish especially, used churban or churban in Hebrew, which is destruction, right? But you can also find catastrophe in Yiddish, catastrophe, and in Ladino, catastrofa. You find it in Greece, for instance, which because catastrophe, disaster, calamity. You find cataclysm in personal letters and so on. Nazi cataclysm, extinction in Yiddish is umkum, or in Hebrew kilayon. Days of wrath, which is in Hebrew yemei hazam, especially in religious writings, and also vernichtung, extermination, and schite, which is slaughter. Untergang or Ondergang in Dutch, the Hitler-Tkufe, the Hitler period, and so on. These are the terms that are used in the writings of the survivors immediately afterwards. What we have is two terms which are not the terms of the survivors, right? But we can explain it by seeing that the main centers of Jewish life after the Holocaust were the English-speaking countries and Israel. So in the discourse of those territories, let's say, these became the dominant terms. Now, another aspect of it is that I used to tell my students. I hope that many of you have seen Steven Spielberg's film E.T. E.T. Have seen all of you, right? So if E.T. would come again on Earth, right? And somebody would say there was a Holocaust or there was a Shoah, would he have understood what happened? The term doesn't say anything. It's only if you know something about it that you can relate to it. And then, of course, the question is, sorry, what happened here is that there are different interpretations of the term, right? Because it's a vague term. So it's not a term of the survivors, and these are vague terms, and therefore the question is how it is interpreted. Is very important, and in historical research, of course, if you have a certain definition or certain understanding of a term, of an event, what the core of the event is, then you're looking in another way for the causation, right? How it came about. So the issue of the terminology is very important. So this is the first point that I wanted to share with you, to be aware of that, right? And being aware, as we learned also regarding Hamas and so on, being aware of what the term means, what people intend to do, is very important in understanding the world we live in. Now, from my point of view, I discerned some 5 stages in the development of Holocaust research. I will relate now mainly to the last stage since 1990. But in short, the first stage is during the period itself. We are living in the modern period, and already in the 1930s and 1940s, during the Nazi regime, there was scholarship. Right? There was a scholarship by institutions who wanted to understand what was happening. Right? You have already publications in scholarly journals like Jewish Social Studies, which started at the end of the 1930s. You have state institutions that were interested in materials to understand what was happening in Germany. Right? In 1933, the High Commission for Refugees coming from Germany, Jewish and other, was established by the League of Nations, and this institution also started to make studies. So we have studies from the period itself, and we have Jewish initiatives to document and even research what was happening. In 1933, you have Alfred Wiener, a German Jew who fled from Germany to the Netherlands and started to collect materials about anti-Semitism and the Nazi conduct already in the 1920s. He came to the Netherlands and joined the local refugee committee, providing it with materials, and then in 1939 moved to Britain. And therefore we have in London the Wiener Library. Another branch of the Wiener Library is at Tel Aviv University since 1980. In the Warsaw Ghetto, we know about the Oyneg Shabbos archive, Ringelblum's archive, but there were more initiatives in Vilna, in Grenoble, in France, and other places. So there is this documenting, and in the Oyneg Shabbos archive, in the underground archive in the Warsaw Ghetto, there are even first studies of Polish-Jewish relations, of religious life, and so on, by Ringelblum and his team. So this is stage one. A second stage starts immediately after the end of World War II. You have two main paths. One via the angle of the trials of major war criminals and the materials that were collected for that purpose, and then German research, which is based on German documentation. Another path is Jewish documentation, Jewish testimonies, and Jewish publications. The first Holocaust periodical that is published is in 1946 in the Displaced Persons camps, and it's called Von letzten Groben, about the most recent destruction. Right? And this lasts until the end of the 1950s, and in those years we have already several comprehensive studies of the Holocaust to try to give a comprehensive picture of what happened without much grassroots research. And that's interesting because a lot of the assumptions that we find in the early literature are still with us today, although they are refuted by later research. And we'll come to that a little bit later. A third stage starts around the Eichmann trial in 1960, lasts until the 1970s. There we have also an expansion of research and more focus on bystanders, but also regarding the interpretation of the way Nazi anti-Jewish policies developed, and I come to it also afterwards when I'll talk about this point, right? Because in this period of the 1960s and 1970s, it has several origins before that, but two major schools of interpretation in German scholarship developed. The first is intentionalism, and the other and the other is functionalism. These are both names that were given to those schools by a British scholar in 1979. Timothy Mason was a historian of Germany. He paid attention to what was going on regarding the research on the Nazi regime in general and the Holocaust in particular. Intentionalism, of course, the idea that there was an intention from the very beginning by Hitler and the Nazis to exterminate the Jews. And the functionalist or the structuralist school, which emerges and was focused on the Nazi bureaucracy, downplayed the role of Hitler, even though the leading functionalist historian Hans Mommsen, who died several years ago, said that Hitler was a weak dictator. But what happened in the Nazi regime is that the bureaucracy was very powerful, and there were fights of competences within the Nazi bureaucracy, and this radicalized anti-Jewish policy and led in the end to the final solution. This is very important, and as I said before, the other aspect which comes up in the 1960s, 1970s is also the issue of the bystanders, state bystanders mainly, and that is Roosevelt in the United States. There's a book from 1967 by Arthur Morse, which is called While 6 Million Died. There is the gradual opening of the British archives and the attitudes of the British authorities towards rescue of Jews from Nazi Europe, first in the 1930s and later on in the 1940s, because there is a 30-year keeping of the archives closed in Britain. And there is also this aspect of the Pope and the Pius XII and his conduct, and this starts with the play by the German playwright Rolf Hochhuth in 1962, and with the study by Saul Friedlander about Pius XII, which was published in 1964. So we have a broadening of the spectrum of other players in the arena of the Holocaust. What happens afterwards is the 1980s, the fight between the intentionalists and functionalists becomes even fiercer, right? But then we come to the point or the watershed moment of 1990. And already in the 1980s, we have a younger generation emerging, and also some outsiders who try to bridge the gap between the intentionalist and the functionalist. And one of the leading scholars on this issue was British, Ian Kershaw. Ian Kershaw, who started as a historian of the Middle Ages, but joined a team led by a German scholar, Martin Broschat. Martin Broschat was the director of the Institut für Zeitgeschichte, that is the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich, and a very influential scholar who wrote a lot about Nazi policies and also about the Holocaust. It turned out in the mid-1980s, when he started a dispute with Saul Friedlander, that he had also been in the Hitlerjugend. And then people started to ask the question, how did people who were formerly aligned with the Nazi regime influence Holocaust research after 1945? And that became an issue in the 1990s. So we have already this attempt to bridge between the schools. Kershaw wrote a biography of Hitler, or a history of Nazi Germany through the angle of Hitler, and he opens the book by saying that I am originally a functionalist, so it is strange that I am writing a biography of Hitler. But that is the beginning of a change. Other scholars that will become important afterwards emerge in this period. One of them is Christopher Browning, and maybe you have heard it known. He was asked by Yad Vashem in 1979 to write the volume on the final solution in a series that was conceived in that period at the end of the 1970s. he had just finished a study of the German Foreign Office in the final solution, and he accepted this invitation. Somewhere in the protocols in my office at Yad Vashem, I have his promise from 1983 that he will submit the manuscript of this volume in 1990, and he submitted the first part of his volume in 2002. That is what is happening with historians when they start to be serious, right? So it took him much more time, and then he said, I will not write the second part of my study. I've had enough of it, right? I'm going into other directions. But that is Christopher Browning. So what happens in those days also, in the 1980s, is that the topic of the Holocaust becomes more and more a public issue, not only in Israel and in Jewish communities, but more broadly at universities. It's being taught now. There are courses about the Holocaust in universities in Western countries. Now, in 1990, we can see it as a watershed moment because a lot of archives in Eastern Europe are opening because of the downfall of communism in those countries. And there's also the accessibility of sites in Eastern Europe which were not open to scholars. For instance, in Babi Yar, right? We knew about the place, but we didn't have the data and also the geography. Another aspect, so the archives, the aspect of the archives is very important. Just to give you an example, in 1945, when Germany was occupied, as you know, the four major allies also divided Berlin between themselves, right? And the Americans took documentation from the ministries of Nazi Germany to the United States. They filmed them. They are in Alexandria outside Washington, D.C., and they returned it to West Germany, the original documentation, in the beginning of 1960s. What they took from a quarter of Berlin was six ships with documentation, right? With containers of documentation. Now the Soviets did the same, and they took from their part to Moscow. This archive was discovered in 1919. It's called the Sonderarchiv, the Special Archive. They took it to Moscow. They ordered it. They didn't let any scholar enter it. And it was suddenly found in 1990 that is 3 kilometers of documentation, right? And that is from 2 quarters of Berlin. Now we have the other parts. We have the various countries that were occupied by Nazi Germany. We have organizations and so on and so forth. So the documentation is enormous. In the Yad Vashem archive, we have today only regarding documentation, paper documentation, also scanned, many of them, more than 220 million pages. Right? So this is an enormous source, but it is also, you can get lost, and many get lost in it. Another thing that happened in the 1990s is inquiry committees. And there are several tens of inquiry committees in different countries in Europe for the purpose of reparations and personal personal reparations to survivors and others, but also coping with the past of those countries. One of the most well-known inquiry committees, and which actually was really the first one, is the Swiss the Swiss one, because Switzerland was accused of keeping dormant accounts of people who perished in the Holocaust and not letting it or giving it to Jewish institutions or to other people who could inherit them. And a special committee was established headed by Professor Bergier, therefore it's also called the Bergier Committee, but it happened also in other countries and regarding companies and so on. I myself participated in a historians committee of the well-known empire of Liechtenstein. Do you know where Liechtenstein is? No, you need a magnifying glass on the map to find it. It's a little country between Austria and Switzerland, which was aligned at the time with Switzerland. During this period, it had 11,000 inhabitants. But they were also accused of keeping dormant accounts and so on. So they established a committee, and for 4 years I enjoyed going there twice a year, being part of this inquiry committee. But there were many committees commissions in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, in Italy, and so on, looking at reparations and restitution, beginning also of the restitution of looted art. So we have more than 30 such committees all over Europe, and it was also imposed by the United States on Eastern European countries who wanted to join the international community, especially the European Union. So Lithuania was urged to establish such a committee and so on. And in these committees, a lot of materials were unearthed, right, regarding a broad variety of issues. Now, another thing that is important in this context is also that we have a more general development of individualization in general, right? So that's an impact of psychology and so on. So what happened in the 1990s is that many more scholars, especially in Germany, started to look at the actors from a personal perspective. That how were they raised? And what did they do after 1945? How were they integrated in the new two Germanys and so on? And therefore we learn much more about the individuals that were involved in the developments. Before that, the emphasis was on structures and general issues. I remember one of these scholars, a leading scholar, Peter Longerich, who also taught here in London as a German scholar, but he was in 1995 at Yad Vashem for several months, and he said that one of the interesting things that he finds in the historiography of the German scholars, mainly the functionalists, is that they speak about developments and they speak about ministries and so on. And okay, here and there you find names, but these are only templates. You don't know who these people really were, right? And moreover, said that when you get to the stage of the final solution, then what you see from a linguistic perspective is that Jews were deported, Jews were killed, and so on. But who was doing it, right? It was done to them, but the persons themselves, what can you learn more about this? So what happened is that the personal aspects became important, and also it is there is a movement from not only the top echelon of Nazi state and from the bureaucracy, a movement to the grassroots level, because everything was implemented on the grassroots level. So you have to look also at the people who did it on the ground, right? And the organizations that were involved in it, like the police, right? Or recently we heard in a new study by Jan Grabowski from Poland, the firefighters in Poland, right, were involved also in the persecution. But in Germany, definitely. Now, another thing that came up because of the opening of Eastern Europe is, and the new findings in Eastern Europe, with all these archives that were closed until this moment, is that a lot of developments took place on the grassroots level there, but without clear instructions from the center in Berlin. So there's the question of the initiatives and the general policy from the center and the issue of the periphery. And also, counter to what was understood before that the killings did not start at the moment of the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, but it is gradual, right? And the main killings of not only men, but also women and children starts in August 1941 and not in June 1941. Between June and August, the main people who were killed were men, right? So the broadening of the concept of killing, and also the places where people were killed, the areas, the territories, they expand. And then we have, for instance, the Babi Yar killing at the end of September 1941, with more than 33,000 people killed actually in 2 days. It's the end of the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah in the Hebrew calendar. But until the end of 1941, more than 1 million people were already killed. Now this is important, and it's important for you, especially when you teach about it, and that is that many people still believe that a decision about the final solution was taken in the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. This is entirely wrong. Right? First of all, the Wannsee Conference was not a conference, and it's a name given later. And it was a Besprechung, that is a meeting, and it's part of the development of the broadening of the final solution. Because the final solution developed already in the month after the invasion of the Soviet Union, in the second half of 1941, right? First in the Soviet Union, and then started to expand. There is a green light given by Hitler, as we assume today, is in the mid-July 1941, in a meeting where there is no protocol of, but this happened, and the Wannsee meeting is actually one step in the development, in the broadening of the final solution to the whole of Europe, from Eastern Europe, from the Soviet Union and Poland, further to Western Europe, Southern Europe, and so on. But one of the questions that arose now is also around the new findings is that it was assumed that a decision about the final solution was taken before the invasion of the Soviet Union. And it's now clear from our research that it is not, right? So the war against the Soviet Union was definitely an either-or war, and it was seen as a final end of the days war against the Jewish communist regime. But the actual decision-making about the final solution comes after the invasion, and within the context of successes of the Wehrmacht, of the Nazi army. But there is no written decision of Hitler. So one of the things that people were thinking is that in the archives in Eastern Europe, we'll be able to find the document about the decision by Hitler. We now know that there was never a written decision. There was an oral decision. There was an oral green light, right? But there are differences of opinion when exactly that happened. Was it in mid-July? And the mainstream historiography will say it was apparently in a meeting on the 16th of July 1941, because afterwards you can see what Himmler will do and how things change. And I said already that in August, the beginning of August 1941, the pattern of killings changes. Women and children are included. But there are people who think it's a little bit later after this. So there will be no final possibility to define and to find it, because we now know for sure that there was never a written document for the order of the final solution, and that it was a part of a mode of action by Hitler. Major decisions by him were never written down. They were oral. Another thing that happens now after 1990 is that the focus on the killings in Eastern Europe becomes central. We have to think about it that much of Holocaust historiography before 1919 was written from the perspective of Western Europe, and where the Western European Jews were sent to Auschwitz, to Sobibor. So the extermination camps became central, and in more sociological and philosophical approaches to the Holocaust, the concept of industrial killing as representing the Holocaust becomes central. Auschwitz, right, becomes the iconic representation of the Holocaust. But if from the almost 6 million people were killed, 2.5 million were killed brutally by shooting in pits in Eastern Europe, then Auschwitz cannot represent the Holocaust in general, right? So we have to look at it in a different way. So from the perspective of scholarship, there is a downplaying of the iconic place of Auschwitz as representing the Holocaust. Now, in order to see the shift, you have to look at two books. One is the sociological study by Zygmunt Bauman from 1989, The Modernity in the Holocaust, which is, in my eyes, a horrible book, but it was praised and got a lot of prizes. There are no Einsatzgruppen in this book. He focuses on the extermination camps, right? And looks at it as a product of modernity. So he emphasizes this iconic place of Auschwitz and the other extermination camp. If you go to the book by Timothy Snyder from 2010, Bloodlands, he said, Auschwitz is on the margins, right? There is an area of killings, and Auschwitz is also part of it, and that is in Eastern Europe. That's the area which he called the Bloodlands. Now, another thing that happens, how late are we? 5 minutes. I will multiply it with another of my 5 minutes. Okay. I'll do my best to go through it. Now, a major scholar of the Holocaust, and his book is indeed very important, was Raoul Hilberg, who died in 2007 and wrote one of the first conceptualizations of the Holocaust, but he was not a historian. Some of my best friends are not historians. He was a political scientist. And he wanted to look at the Holocaust as a model, and he proposed a stepwise developmental model of the Holocaust. He said, in 1933, first, the Jews had to be defined. So Hitler came to power. He wanted anti-Semitic policies. The bureaucracy came in. Hitler was not so important afterward. The bureaucracy becomes important. The bureaucracy defined the Jews. then moved forward to the next step, expropriation of the Jews. Later on comes the concentration of the Jews in 1939, with the establishment of ghettos, according to him, and the establishment of Jewish councils, Judenräte, and the last step is annihilation. So you have a linear development, stage-wise, stepwise development, but which is linear, ending up in a final solution. And this is now entirely understood entirely differently, right? So one of the most important developments in the 1930s is emigration, which is seen by him only as a side effect, but it is a major component of the anti-Jewish policies. And there are anti-Jewish activities before the definition, and there are other things that developed. So this whole concept has fallen apart. And there is another differentiation that he made, categorization, and that is perpetrators, victims, bystanders. And that is often also used in research and teaching. But we now know that perpetrators were not only Germans, there were also other countries. Victims, we have various stages in the aspect of the Jews. You have bystanders who become victims, and you have bystanders who become perpetrators, and especially this aspect is much more varied today. As I said before, also there is the focus on the biographies of many perpetrators, and the perpetrator dimension before 1933, after 1945, and so seeing what they were doing in this period of 1933 through 1945 in a more broader context. And then you will see that a lot of people were involved in anti-Jewish policies and actions who were not 100% Nazis. Right? You have all kinds, you have benefactors, you have all kinds of people who were involved, and I'll come to it in a moment. The extent of local and Nazi-allied involvement, turning it into a European enterprise, is of major importance. Now, another aspect, and that is something that we mentioned in the beginning, also when Charles opened this meeting, that is the challenge of genocide scholarship, right? And the question is if we can really define the Holocaust as a genocide of the Jews. Right? I'll come back to it. I say, no, the genocide of the Jews is part of the Holocaust. That's already an appetizer for what I'll say in the end. But what happened is that the term genocide was, of course, invented by or coined by Raphael Lemke in 1943 and published in 1944. It was embraced already in the Nuremberg trials, and in December 1948 we have the Convention for the Prevention of and Punishment of Genocide by the United Nations. So there is an official definition of genocide, but for several decades genocide was identified with the Holocaust. Since the end of the 1970s, the field of genocide studies developed, right? And it was developed, first of all, by a series of Jewish scholars who wanted to look at the more universal aspects of the Holocaust, right? Since the beginning of the 1990s, it has expanded enormously. And what happened in the field of genocide scholarship is that the question of the centrality of the Holocaust has been raised. And in an overview of genocide scholarship by an Australian genocide scholar, Colin Tetz, in 2011, he wrote that what he found in the field of in the community of genocide scholars, that there is an enmity towards the Holocaust, because they don't like the Holocaust to be central to this field of scholarship. So here, Charles, we meet one of the challenges of scholarship. I can tell you that one of the major persons in this enmity, let's say, but who is also involved in Holocaust scholarship is an Australian scholar called Dirk Moses. He is very influential. He was the editor of the Journal of Genocide Studies, and he's also very anti-Israel and anti-Zionist, and it plays a part in his scholarship too. Now, the problem of mainstream historiography, as I see it, until recently, is that the attempt was to find the path that led to the final solution, right? So it is a tunnel. It's a tunnel way of looking at the developments from the end, from the murder, and trying to find a way to the final solution. So we had the intentionalist way, we had the functionalist way, but they were both looking at the final solution as the pinnacle of the developments. And the ultimate goal of the anti-Jewish enterprise, and we heard it also in the definitions that you proposed in the beginning. But what that is a problem, because beyond the issue of the murder of the Jews, you have other ways of persecution, and they continued also parallel to the stage of the murder of the final solution. So there were other directions too. And what I want to emphasize, and that was disregarded by many scholars because they were focusing on the documentation of the bureaucracy and of the organizations, is a mental aspect. And the mental aspect is the goal of exercising the Jewish spirit, the Jüdischen Geist, the idea of human equality, according to Hitler and Nazism, right? So Marxism, and that was mentioned also by Joel Kotek yesterday, Marxism and capitalism and democracy and whatever you want of all these apparently different political and social movements, they're actually all the same, because they speak about the equality of human beings. And equality of human beings is a Jewish concept. Why? Because the Jewish idea of creation is that all humankind are descendants of Adam, of the first person, right? That was taken over by Christianity, afterwards by liberalism, by socialism, and so on. So what I want to finish with is that actually, if we look at it from this perspective, that the intention, there was an intention by the Nazi regime, and we can find it already in the first political writing of Hitler from 1919, where he speaks about the danger of the Jews in all fields of modern society, right? That is the penetration of this idea of Jewish equality. You find it also in Mein Kampf, you find it in a lot of documentation. And so when he uses the term Marxism, he actually means human equality, and that's a Jewish idea, and that has to be erased versus the hierarchy of nature, the racial hierarchy of nature. If we understand it in this way, and we know that Hitler did not know how to implement this vague idea of getting rid of the Jewish dimension, of the Jewish spirit, then we can understand and also bridge the gap between intentionalism and functionalism, because what happened from the first moment of Hitler's ascendance to power is that a lot of people joined in to achieve this goal, but they interpreted according to their understanding in medicine, in linguistics, in physics, in art, and so on. So the persecution of the Jewish spirit goes in many directions. One chapter of it will be the killing of the Jews, but it's not only the killing of the Jews, it's also burning the Jewish books, right? It is also countering Jewish concepts. And one of the weird examples is, for instance, that in 1934, the Deutsche Sprachverein, the Association for the German Language, embarks on a campaign of Entjuding, of de-Judaization of the German language. What exactly is it? I don't know, but that was the idea, and you find it also in the legal domain and so on. So I have a final definition, a new redefinition, as I said, of the Holocaust. We won't read it here. I asked El Shaddai to have it copied and handing it out to you. I hope it will still happen. It is long. You can take a picture, but I want to have it handed out. And now we'll have time for Q&A, right? Still some minutes.
Okay, so we have a brief, like 10 minutes for Q&A. Not much time, but thank you.
But later on, people can ask me.
Yeah, continue on. So there's many questions. I want to make a point because I don't want to take from the questions, but it's interesting how when you say that so the demonization or the Nazi, how Nazism kind of attacked the Jew in different scholarly disciplines. You know, it came to mind right away. You know, this in this current contemporary context, it started in Middle East studies, but it's now sort of going, you know, even attacking the hard sciences of demonizing Israel, Zionism, and the Jews. So, just a thought. I don't know if you want to comment on it or.
No, later on. Okay, but you're right. It spread to various, and therefore focusing it on one thing is one of the first results of in 1945. People wanted to understand and propose things that we now see in another way.
Okay, Sarah.
Thank you for your presentation. I noticed you did mention IRN, which is interesting, and I was curious, being specifically about the Menality Eagle and 19th Jerusalem, where you would situate her in your 5 statements.
Okay.
She dated a bad guy.
Yes.
You want to click or you want to?
No, I'll collect several things. Yeah.
About genocide scholarship, I want to know how do you explain the ongoing phenomenon that among the genocide scholars, they claim what happening in Gaza is genocide.
Okay.
Quick question.
Yes.
I was curious among the different, they're not scholarship, but where does Yisro books fit into?
School books.
Yisro.
Yisro books.
Where
Okay.
they fit in. The other part of it is that I've learned more recently about the camps that were in Eastern Ukraine and Transnistria, which were
Okay.
very different in how they operated, and I've read survivor reports, and I'm just wondering how those.
So the Yisro books and also the killings.
Interviews of those camps in Eastern Europe, like Peshora, where, where
Okay.
disease and death look like.
Shy? Okay, well, okay.
As the survivors are passing on, and as time is getting farther and farther from the Holocaust, are you worried about the younger generation not being as connected as we are to the catastrophe?
You can take some more.
Let's see. Let's start here.
Or let's take Hedy and
Okay.
then we'll.
I wanted to piggyback on, your name is
Juliana.
Juliana's piggyback, to say, within that question and the concern about what's happening with the younger generation, you're thinking from Yad Vashem and your scholarship, is the lens shifting now in any substantial way to, in the educational sphere, the action steps, is something shifting within that? And what's the message to us as educators within the generational issue and within the post-October 7 issue?
I'm gonna have the chutzpah, I'm gonna collect 3 more quick ones, and you
Okay.
do as you wish.
So much.
Please be concise, too, no
Yeah,
time.
very quickly, and my question is just really similar to the last two, and it's just the functionality of this definition. Thank you for the definition, but the functionality of it, if we were to apply it in our classrooms, like to our students, like how can we utilize this? How can the students basically functionally use this definition?
Quick. Isaac, quick.
How
Okay.
apply it in the classroom?
How to apply in the classroom?
Is
Oh.
functionality of your
That's your problem, not mine.
Very briefly,
Yes,
Isaac.
Professor, just wanted to get your thoughts on the inclusion of the Sephardic experience in historiography, which is longer than GAP, I think is how much.
Gloria, quickly.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is the work of Matthias Kunzel and Jeffrey Herf embraced as part of Holocaust study?
The-
Jeffrey Herf and Matthias Kunzel.
Yeah, so what is the question about
The
that?
question is that embraced as part of Holocaust scholarship?
Oh.
Robert.
Thank you. Professor, in your lecture, you mentioned the decision took place, after the invasion. I am a student of Jewish history, but I'm not a specialist. And I still remember very well reading the Holocaust by bullets. And what happened early on, that happened in September 1941, and then when Hitler gave the order, during the Wednesday, and he gave the Commissar order. Can you locate this in your speeches?
Thank you. Abdurrahim, very quick.
Thank you. Just a question about the situation of rejection of Holocaust in Muslim societies.
In Muslim society.
Holocaust in Muslim societies.
What the knowledge about or
Research.
the research?
Yeah. I know only 2 books, The Holocaust and North-Africa, written by Abu, and among the writings of Rabbi Sato. Is there other things?
Okay.
That's all.
That's all. Okay. Do you have time for an annual course? Right?
We need it.
Okay, Hannah Arendt. Look, Hannah Arendt is a very interesting scholar. I think is important because she has been influential. The problem is that we now have a Hannah Arendt Hasidism. So we have a whole court of people who admire her uncritically, right? And it's different to understand her in the context of the 1950s and 1960s and today. So for instance, there is this film about Eichmann that was filmed in 1999. What's it called? By Broman and Eyal Sivan, right? And taking her as the main interpreter of the Holocaust, and that is entirely wrong, right? So if her major book on this issue is of course Eichmann in Jerusalem, and she really didn't understand Eichmann. But there's so much research now on Eichmann since the beginning of the 1960s that is impossible to uphold her view of Eichmann as a cog, just a limited cog in the Nazi regime, and that he was a how did she define it?
The banality of evil.
Hmm?
In the banality of evil.
No, there's the banality. Yeah, the banality of evil, right? Yeah, right. So that's the subtitle, right? So Eichmann was very active and he's very important, even though he had a low rank, but he was Heydrich's right hand, and his imprint can be found in many places, not everywhere. So in the Eichmann trial, on the one hand, some of his activities were exaggerated and others were not included. But we now have so much research on him that he's important. And also, our understanding of the Jewish councils is entirely wrong. There's an article of mine online, you can find it on this. So that is one. Meng, genocide in Gaza. And that is one of the manipulations, of course, of the term. It is used now. It's not the only term. You have a fascism is used, and all kinds of terms are now as battle words. One of the amazing things is that you have genocide scholars who did not define the Hamas attack on the 7th of October as genocide, right? Because it has all the components that you can find in the Convention for the Prevention of Genocide, and in Lemkin's definition, right? In the attack, of course, if you take into account also the Hamas Charter, which Uzi Rabi showed us yesterday, and it's important to read the whole charter. But in this context, it's important. What happened in the field of genocide studies is that we have these legal definitions, right? But what happened in genocide scholarship in recent decades is that the concept was often broadened without clear limitations, right? And one of the things that happened is also with a British scholar, a British sociologist of genocide, Martin Shaw, who wrote a book in 2007, Sociology of Genocide, and he says intention in genocide is not important. We have to look at structures. Now that is taking out the major issue from the genocide definition, right? So now you can understand also that he attacks the Holocaust very much. He's very anti-Israel, right? Also, so, but when you take out and you say genocide is actually an equivalent of mass killings, then you come closer. Then you say, okay, Israel is carrying out, and so on. I disagree, deeply disagree, but if you look at the discourse, of course it's there. And this happened also, if we think about 1982 with the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, then you could read in the newspaper the final solution of the Palestinian question, right? So we're weaponizing terms. And so 2 minutes, wow. Yizkor books, there's a lot here for you. Your name, Juliana?
No, mine.
Out of you. Who was the Yizkor?
Here, Wendy.
Yeah, okay, Yizkor books. There's a whole scholarship on Yizkor books. They're very important, very interesting. You have to read them carefully, right? It's a genre, right? An East European genre, which was taken over, interestingly, in two cases one by Salonican Jews and Libya also. You got in Western Europe you have a different genre, but they tell us a lot about mostly about Eastern European communities. The camps, that's another issue. That's a whole other field of research. Has enormously developed since the end of the 1990s, right? And has not to do directly with the issue of Yizkor books. Yeah, it's separate. So you have the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum series of Encyclopedia of Camps and Ghettos. I disagree with their definition of ghettos. That's another thing. But in camps, the number of camps that they found is more than 40,000. So some of them are in Ukraine, of course. Survivors and their role. Survivors became important in education and commemoration, of course. But it became important, that is important to emphasize, due to scholarship. So the entrance of survivors into the arena of representing the Holocaust begins after the Eichmann trial, but mainly since the end of the 1970s. and it has to do with generational development and survivors connecting with their grandchildren, right, and writing memoirs and so. And this is a flood since the end of the 1970s. You have also memoirs before, but it is mainly since the end of the 1970s, and then you have the development of the journeys to Poland, and they need survivors and so on. And what happens with survivors that they often tell not only their own story, but they try to tell the story of the Holocaust without knowing it. Right? And so concern, yes, but we have the memoirs, we have a lot of interviews and so on, testimonies. So, of course, that's the way of history. And they will not live forever. How to apply the redefinition? I said it's up to you, but I think it's important to emphasize this aspect. It has a cultural, ideological aspect which is forgotten by many scholars who emphasize the decision making and the act and so on. So not what is behind it, right? And that is important. Sephardic experience. There is quite a lot of scholarship in recent years, right? But the issue is also how what do you define or what do you include in Sephardic experiences? Because there were Sephardis in Germany, in the Netherlands, and there's a lot in Dutch on the Sephardic experience in the Netherlands, right? On Salonika, you have early research, Molcho and Nechama and so on, but you have in recent years more, because in Greece, Holocaust research developed in recent years much more. And
I'm going to cut the
Yugoslavia and so on.
I'm sorry, everybody's very welcome to stay and speak to Dan, but
Yeah.
in the some people need to take a break and stretch and go to the washroom and have some coffee, because we have to be back here in less than 25 minutes. So
But
Dan,
one thing I
one
want
more
to
thing.
say,
Yeah.
Holocaust by bullets.
Holocaust by bullets.
I entirely dislike this
Horrible.
expression, horrible. It was invented by Patrick Desbois, who is a very interesting person. I know him for 20 years, more than 20 years. I think he has the aspiration to become a pope. And that's one of his, but that's what I believe. But look, he did interesting work.
Wait,
but if you say Holocaust,
Hold on, I agree with you. Continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Everybody, if you want to take a break, please go ahead. If you want to stay here, you're welcome. Dan, thank you.
Doctor, how are you?
Fine.
Do you have a moment?